Hey everyone, and welcome to another Synced Up Designs Equipment Basics video. My name is Kyle, and in this one, we're going to be expanding off of our weapon tossing technique and learning how to throw higher tosses on rifle from the left hand. If you could just do me a favor real quick and hit that like button down below, as well as subscribe to our channel. And if you want to stay updated with anything we post in the future, go ahead and hit that bell icon as well. Anyways, with that taken care of, let's go learn how to throw our rifle. So just to give an overview of what we should be expecting in this video, we're gonna go over how to do rifle tosses, specifically from the left hand. So we'll be starting in a left flat and we'll be going to catch all of our tosses in a right flat position. In detail, we're going to be going over our doubles, triples, and quads, going over the prep, the starting position, the initiation to the release, rotation, and different things like that, as well as the difference between heights as we expand into those higher tosses. We're also going to discuss the components that go into throwing 5s, 6s, and 7s, which will essentially be the same approach, minus the small differences in rotation, obviously. But the only thing is I won't be able to demonstrate them because of lack of ceiling height in this room. So the first thing I want to talk about before we actually get into tossing is going to be our prep, or otherwise known as our dip for our tosses. When we threw singles in our previous tossing video, we didn't need a dip just because there was so little rotation happening compared to the other tosses that we will be doing. But when we expand into those higher tosses, we will require a dip so we have a little bit more energy going into the push. So essentially what a dip is this down angle position right here with the left hand in line with my left hip, right hand in line with my right shoulder. We've gone over this in previous rifle holding positions before. What this does is allows us to have a little bit extra space in our push, whereas beforehand we started in flat and only had that much room, but when we start at this angle, we have a lot more energy we can build up into that push to allow for higher rotations and speedier tosses. How we get to a dip position is we're going to be starting in our left flat position, and like we discussed before, I have a little bit of space between the palm of my hand and the rifle. My 4 fingers are glued to the front of the gun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my left hand where it is, and I'm going to pull my right hand up to this angle. I am engaging both of my hands on the dip, but I am pulling the butt up to create this angle position while I'm trying to keep my left hand in the spin dot. As I do that, my palm is gonna squeeze to the back of the rifle, kind of suction cup to it, and I'm gonna really squeeze my gun in this position to engage that energy. From there, I'm able to push going into my release for whatever toss I may do. This is what's called our quarter dip, which is a hip-shoulder angle. I'm gonna use a quarter dip for doubles, triples, and quads. For 5s, 6s, and 7s, I'm gonna push to what's called a full dip, which is going to essentially go from that angle position and pull the rifle all the way to a straight up and down vertical position. Remember, when we're referencing vertical or flat with rifle, it's from the edge of the bolt to the edge of the nose, not edge of the butt to the nose. So we want to make sure that it's this section of the gun that's straight up and down, and the butt is going to be slightly off to the side. When I do this, my left hand is not going to be in the pure center of my body. It's going to be off slightly to the side where that spin dot is, as close as possible, allowing for that full dip rotation. When I do a full dip, I'm going to use it for my 5s, 6s, and 7s. So when it comes to executing a toss, there are 2 main factors that we need to be aware of. That is speed of the rotation and height of the rotation as well. My right and my left hand are each solely responsible for one of those things. My right hand is going to be the thing that decides the speed and the rotation based on how much I push and how much energy I give into that. My left hand is going to decide the height based on what position it goes to when I release the rifle. So when we were talking about singles, we talked about the rifle going up to this outer angle right here before I let go of the gun. That's going to remain the same for every single toss, double, triples, quads, so on and so forth. But if we also notice, my left hand stayed at my spin dot when I released a single because it didn't have any height to it. It was really mainly just rotation as it came up and over. When I try to go to higher tosses, I'm actually going to be lifting up my hand as I go through. So there's different release points and release levels as I expand into my higher tosses. So we start in that dip position, and depending on what toss I want to do, I want to make sure I'm adding enough energy into it and I'm pulling up to that respective release point at the same time as I get the rifle to this outer angle. So we just have to make sure that we are aware of the push energy and the release point, the difference between different rotations. So when it comes to throwing a double, I'm gonna do the exact same approach that I do for a single, but the only difference is that I'm gonna add a little bit more energy in my push, and I'm gonna change my release point. Instead of releasing at my spin dot, I'm gonna release at my chest level. But the difference is that to get this rotation out, I need to make sure that I get my left hand from my spin dot to my chest level, from my dip to my release, at the same amount of time as I would if I was to stay in the spin dot. So that's where the increase in velocity and energy happens to allow for higher rotations. If I was to go from the spin dot up to wherever my release point is for a 6, I have to get from here to here in the same amount of time as I would from here to here. So that's how we see the energy fluctuation. But again, for a double, I'm gonna be starting in that quarter dip. I'm gonna pull to release the rifle at my chest level, and I let go of the gun when it gets up to this upper angle right here. When I let go, I'm gonna see the butt go up once, it's gonna rotate up again in the air, and then it's gonna rotate a third time in the air before I go in for my catch. So for every toss, you're gonna see the end of the rifle go up one extra time more than the rotation that you're throwing. So if I'm throwing a double, I'm gonna see the butt go up 3 times. If I throw a triple, I'm gonna see the butt go up 4 times. So quick demo of my double. I'll go 5, 6, 7, 8, push up and squeeze. I see go up once on the release, once in the air, one more time, and then I go into my catch. Every other technical thing that we talked about in terms of approaching a toss in our previous video still applies. I'm just changing my prep for my dip and my release point. So now moving into my triple, I am going to do a quarter dip again like I did for my double, but my release point is going to change. I'm gonna go from my spin dot and I'm gonna go all the way to where my wrist is in line with my shoulder. So a little bit higher than what I did for my double. Again, the speed and when I get from here to here needs to remain the same. I dip on count 8, I release on count 1. I still have more distance to cover though. So I need to make sure that I'm a little bit speedier with that release point. The rifle is gonna go butt up 4 times in the air before I go in for my catch flat at my waist. So quick demo of that. I go 5, 6, 7, 8, push up and squeeze. And that'll be my triple right there. One thing to be aware of is just a reminder, when you go from your dip to your release, you push first to initiate the spin, and then when it gets to this upper angle right here, when I'm gonna let go, that's when I give that extra little flick with my left hand as I open my palm to get the release. Careful not to pull the rifle up with your left hand, and I'll go over a little bit more detail why that's not gonna help us in a minute. Now to go over the release point of the quad, I am still gonna do that same quarter dip that I did for doubles and triples, but my release point in my left hand is going to be forearm in line with my shoulder. So first I did wrist in line with chest, wrist in line with shoulder. Now I'm doing forearm, or middle of my forearm in line with my shoulder for the release point of a quad. Again, space from here to here has increased, but the time to get there has stayed the same. So I need to put more energy into it to get there and increase the velocity of that. So we go 5, 6, 7, 8, push up, squeeze. And that'll be my quad. Again, we see the butt go up 1 extra time. You'll see it rotate 5 times in the air before I go into my release. It goes up on the release, and then 4 more times up before I go into the catch. So like I said, I'm not gonna be able to demonstrate my 5, 6s, and 7s because I don't have a high enough ceiling for that in this room right now, but I do wanna go over the release points and change in the dip. First off, we are going from a quarter dip to a full dip now for my 5, 6s, and 7s, and then everything else above that is gonna be a full dip. So the same idea that we talked about in terms of getting from your spin dot to whatever release point you're going to for your toss, in the same amount of time, even though you're covering a larger amount of distance, all of that still applies to the dip as well. I'm going from a flat to a vertical as opposed to a flat to an angle, but I still have the same amount of time to do it. So we had to put more energy into that. For a 5, my release point is going to be elbow in line with my shoulder. A 6 is going to be elbow in line with my mouth. And then a 7 is going to be elbow in line with my forehead. So slowly rising up as I go through that. Now to review all of our release points real fast, I started with a single, which is gonna be in line with my spin dot. A double is going to be wrist in line with my chest. A triple will be wrist in line with my shoulder. Quad is middle of forearm in line with shoulder. 5 is a right angle or elbow in line with shoulder. 6 is elbow in line with mouth. And then 7 is elbow in line with forehead. Now, let me just be clear that when it comes to release points, that's a general rule of thumb, all the points that I just gave, but it is going to vary based on body proportions. Some people may have longer arms, some people may have shorter torsos, different things like that. So it may slightly vary for each individual, but overall, if you can try and commit to being as close as possible to those release points, you will have a little bit more consistency across the ensemble. Something else to be aware of is going to be your body alignment as you go into your dip and your release and your catch. The biggest things I want you to be aware of is when you go into your dip, be careful not to allow that corresponding shoulder to dip in with the equipment as you do that. You want to keep that lifted and square as you go into your dip and isolate just your arms to accomplish the dip, push into your release as you go through. That also applies to when you get to your release points. For triples through about 5s or so, it's a pretty easy, but when you get to 6s and 7s, the tendency is to allow that shoulder to drop and kind of twist. So trying to keep this square as well as you just lift the arm up into your release point is going to be super crucial to making sure that your body stays still. And then lastly, when you go in to catch your rifle at that flat position at your waist, the tendency is to allow the butt to kind of take over you and you drop that corresponding shoulder down when you go into the catch. You want to counteract that and lift up on the catch to make sure that you're not allowing that shoulder to drop down as well. Another thing you can do is utilize your hands by pulling them apart on the catch as if you're trying to rip your rifle in half. And that'll help you really solidify that strong catch, open up the chest and lift up to make sure that we're not collapsing down on the catch itself. Another thing I want to talk about is something called your peak, which essentially is the top part of your rotation when you throw a toss before it starts to come back down when you go into a catch. Depending on the tempo you're using, that count of the peak is going to vary. If you're doing a very slow tempo, obviously the count is going to be a little bit earlier on. It may be an and count or something. But if you're doing a super quick tempo, it may be a whole count, and it may be 5 counts after your release. So it really just depends on what tempo you're using. But as you're going through your tosses, I just want you to take a notice of the fact that when you go to release, it finds a peak where it hovers just for a quick second and then it starts to descend again. So take some time to take a few of these tosses with a tempo and see if you can find where that peak count is, because it's really going to help you in terms of counting your rotation and knowing when to start putting your hands in for the catch as well. So being aware of your peak count is super helpful for so many different reasons. So another detail I want to talk about is something I quickly mentioned earlier on in this video, but it's going to be the timing between your push and your release as you go through to toss a rifle. When we go to release the gun, a lot of tendencies for some people is to solely use their left hand to get the toss out. And what happens when you do that is if I go for my dip and I only use my left hand to pull the rifle up, I'm going to lead with the nose and the heavier part of the gun is going to be pulling it down. So ultimately this is gonna make my toss super slow because I didn't lead with the heavier part of the rifle. I'm also gonna have this super awkward like hanging right hand. Some people call it the T-Rex arm because I didn't actively push my butt going into the toss. So you really wanna think about pushing the butt first so it can be the thing that leads you into this toss, and you're not really pulling up with your left hand. The rifle is pulling your left hand up to that release point, and then you let go and it takes care of the rest of the work for you. So not only does it make it a more quick and speedy rotation, but it also takes a lot of the energy and work out of your hands and puts it into the rifle. So really focus on pushing first and then going up into your release. Although it is a very quick turnover, push up, not push up, I still want to make sure that I'm pushing first and then going into my release. So if you need to, use this drill of pushing to swing and feel the weight of that butt go up before you try and get these tosses out. The last thing I want to talk about is going to be the pathway that you take with your left hand as you pull to go up into your release points. A tendency for a lot of people is going from their dip position at their spin dot is to take a circular pathway around and then get up to their release point, which does a couple of things. One, it slows your release up into this point right here, and then you end up having a slow toss. But two, no matter how much force you put into the rifle, you're canceling that out by circling it around and then going up into your release point. So you're not able to get the full extent of your push into your toss as you go through. What you want to do is you want to start in your spin dot position, and you want to imagine like there's this little elevator slightly on the left side of your shoulder, and you want to go straight up the elevator. Starting from that spin dot, go to your single release, go to your double release, your triple, your quad, your 5, so on and so forth. So it actually means that your elbow is going to be stacked directly underneath your wrist, which will help support your hand in that release as you go through. We don't want to open this out to the side, because then we're taking that rounded pathway, which just takes too long, but then also causes extra issues. So really focus on stacking there and creating that picture underneath your toss as you go into your release point. So now I'd like to recap everything that we've gone over in terms of how to throw a rifle toss from the left hand. The first thing we did is we talked about the dips, which is going to be a different prep for us than we did for singles. We do quarter dips for our doubles, triples, and quads, and full dips for our 5, 6s, and 7s. And essentially all this does is help us give a little bit extra energy into that push hand. Afterwards, we talked about the approach to a rifle toss, the difference of the right hand applying the speed and rotation, and the left hand applying the height. Once we understood that, we went over the specific placements for our doubles, triples, and quads. Double is a release point at your chest, triple is a release point at your shoulder, and then quad is a release point with your forearm in line with your shoulder. That difference in height is what allows for the increase in rotation. And then we also stress the fact that we still have the same amount of time from point A, which is your dip, to point B, which is that release. So you need to increase the speed if there's more distance that you need to cover. Afterwards, we talked about the same information for our 5, 6s, and 7s. 5 is elbow in line with shoulder, 6 is elbow in line with mouth, and 7 is elbow in line with forehead. To finish it out, we went over some of the details of the approach to the toss. First, we went over making sure that you lead with the butt of your rifle. Don't pull up with your left hand. Actively use that push to help you get the rotation out. We talked about our shoulder orientation. Make sure we don't dip the shoulder on the dip, we don't pull it up on the release, and we don't let it fall down on the catch. We also talked about the stacking of our elbow underneath our hand, making sure that instead of rounding out that pathway, that we're thinking about going straight up into the air to make sure that we are keeping that stacked and we don't take extra longer paths, which could cause our rotation to slow down. And then lastly, we talked about our peaks, and then which is essentially the point where the rifle will hover in the air for a second and then start to descend before I go in for the catch. We discussed how the peak count can vary based on your tempo that you're using, so I would recommend going to practice this with different tempos so you can see how that fluctuates with that. And there was our video on how to do left-handed tosses on rifle. I know this is one of my favorite things to do in color guard, so it was super fun making this, and I hope you had fun learning it as well. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like down below, and if you have any questions, as always, head over to the comment section and we'll help you guys out. Anyways, I'll see you guys on the next one, and have a good day.